What about young men in the ministry? I have had the privilege over these last 30 years to place a lot of time into young men, training them for the ministry. 1 in 20 men who answer the call of God to preach make it. Why is there such a rate of failure among young men? Join us today on the Higher Grounds podcast. We will be talking to 2 young men who are endeavoring to serve God in the ministry. Join us now for the Higher Grounds podcast. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Thank you for being with us today. As you can see, the set has changed to some degree. My co-hosts today, with me today, to my left and your right, is Brother Matt Tucker. He's been the man behind the camera for some time now in the Higher Grounds podcast crew, and he is the pastor of the Gordon Heights Baptist Church. I always mess that up, and I don't know why. It's probably because he's never had me come preach for him yet. That's probably what it is. And then to my right and your left, this is Brother Josh Russell. He is a member here at the Galilee Baptist Church, and Josh pastored for quite a while. What was the name of that church, Brother Josh?
Ross Hill Baptist.
Ross Hill Baptist Church in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, and he has the dubious privilege and honor of also being my son-in-law. He married my daughter, Sarah, and we love Brother Josh and thank God for him. Well, today I wanted to bring these 2 gentlemen on the podcast, and we wanted to talk about just the subject of young men in the ministry, young men pastoring. One of the things that I am finding is that seemingly there are fewer and fewer young men that are entering the ministry today. And I am curious about that, and I want us to talk about that just a little bit, talk about your experiences in the ministry, where you come from as far as the call of God on your life, and what God did in your life to call you to preach, the pastor that mentored you, the men that have put into your life, that sort of a thing.
Yes,
and I think that on the Higher Grounds podcast, of course, one of the things that we do here at the podcast is we do our best to try to enlighten the citizen about what's going on politically in the land. We're interested in educating folks in the church and helping them to understand the perspective of their pastor, understand the perspective of a biblical church, which we've covered in the podcast before, and then as well, encouraging pastors and helping them. And wouldn't you say, Brother Matt, I know you talk to a lot of preachers, would you say that a lot of men that are in the ministry are downtrodden, discouraged, and having a lot of difficulties?
Yes, sir.
What do you think, in your opinion, based on you speaking to the men that you speak to, what seemingly is a lot of the difficulties that the men are facing?
Well, what I'm facing a lot of times is the attendance, church attendance. Like a lot of times, of course, you study a message 8-10 hours, and take 30 minutes to preach, and then half your congregation not show up. And then, of course, social media, you see that they're on social media posting things that they've been doing during church time, and that's getting a little discouraging, just spending your time studying and prepping and praying. And
now, that's some of the things that you're hearing from men and some of the things you're experiencing as well.
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir.
This technological age certainly gives you an opportunity to see what people are doing, whether they want you to or not. Sure does. And you, Josh, I know that, of course, you and I, being family, we talk a lot, share a lot together. And you as well, I know that you speak to a lot of preachers. You try to encourage preachers along the way, having been in the pastorate and know some of the things that you have to deal with. What are you hearing talking to younger preachers, younger men? I know you and I have talked about that some. What do you see?
From the younger men, I know of a young man in the Dallas area that, he's been approached by multiple people in his church that our former pastor just preached to us and we ran the church. And that is a lot of what young men are facing is we just want you to preach and give us a feel-good message and we'll run the church how we want to run it.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Right.
That's modern day church ethics, or what do you want to call it?
Yes, sir.
You know, here's one of the things that I'm seeing, and we're going to cover some of these things from time to time, and we have covered this issue with other men who have been on the podcast who, have been in a church and been forced to leave. I was recently preaching a funeral of a preacher, and this preacher had passed away, and he was, he was a very well respected man, and there were a lot of people who come to this particular funeral, and a lot of them were preachers. I don't know, there may have been 50 or 60 or 70 preachers that were just at the pastor's funeral. Yeah. And he died fairly young. And so there was a lot of them that were there. And of course, preachers were talking. And there were all kinds of preachers at this funeral. This preacher happened to have been an independent Baptist preacher, but he was such a kind man, and it made an impact in his community, and was held in such high respect that there were independent Baptist preachers there, unaffiliated Baptist preachers there, non-denominational preachers there. There were preachers there from Pentecostal churches and Southern Baptist churches, and it run the gamut, all because this man was just highly respected.
Right.
And I was sitting around talking to some of the different preachers that were there, and there were a group of Southern Baptist preachers that had gathered, and one of them made this statement. He said, this particular state that I live in, he was talking about the state he lived in, he said, this state leads the nation in pastoral suicides. I thought it was a strange and odd conversation, and so I began to engage him about that conversation and, why he brought that up and such. And he said that this particular state that he lived in, he said it leads the nation in pastoral suicides, but he said, secondly, it also leads the nation in pastoral forced resignation. In other words, these men the churches come to these men and say, you're either going to resign or we're going to fire you, and it's just not going to be good for you. Right. And so it's interesting that those two corollaries were so closely related. And I began to think about that in regard to young men entering the ministry and some of the pressures that they have to deal with. Now, Brother Matt, you've been pastoring there at Gordon Heights for how many years now? 3 years. So a young man, young time, first pastorate, and yours was the first pastorate.
Yes, sir.
And in the 3 years that you've been there, and of course I know a little bit of your background, and coming up around you as just a young preacher, I would dare say I probably knew you before you answered the call of God to preach, probably.
You're right.
And I know your pastor and his mentorship in your life. Now, I don't think there was any, and this is my humble opinion, because I've known Matt for a long time, but it's my opinion that you were probably as prepared to pastor a church as anyone else I knew, based on your pastor, your church, and your the mentorship in your life and your maturity in the ministry. But here's my question: was the ministry everything you thought it would be when you entered it?
It was kind of like half. I thought I entered some things that I didn't know about, and there were some things that I've learned along the way, still learning. And so when I entered into the ministry, it was the preaching aspect is always easiest. When you're preaching behind the pulpit, it's easier than pastoring.
Say that again, because I think people need to hear that from a young man. What's the easiest part of what you do?
The easiest part is preaching when you get behind the pulpit on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. But the most difficult part of preaching is pastoring. When you're pastoring a congregation of 30 families or more, and you got to pastor them each week. That's the easy part. That's the hard part. The easy part is preaching.
Right. Now, I'm gonna break this down. Okay, so if you're telling me the easiest part's preaching, and would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that.
And I'm going to ask you the same question, then we're going to go back and divide this up. Now, when you took the pastorate and started pastoring where you were, was it what you thought it would be, or was it like, I didn't realize this?
Mostly how I thought it'd be from watching how people treated my pastor and the pastor I had before that. you could see correlations, how things were pretty much the same everywhere you go, it's just a different face.
Right. People are the same wherever you go, kind of
Yes, sir.
mantra. And when you say how people treated my pastor, is that statement that you made in a positive light or in a negative light, or
It can be in both.
It's just reality.
In reality, yes.
Okay. All right. So here's how I was going to break that down. So when it comes to preaching, a man that's worth his salt, and I'm not talking about a man that goes on to sermoncentral.com and pays a monthly membership and downloads and says what someone else has said. I'm talking about someone that studies to show themselves approved unto God. Right? All right. So a man that studies and prays and works his way through a text. He doesn't just, preach at the air. I'm talking about not a man who's known for his style, but he's known for his substance. Okay.
Yes, sir.
How long does it take you to study to preach a singular message?
I usually, on an average, about 8 hours.
About 8 hours. And I know you're not a long-winded preacher. How much is the average time that
25 to 30 minutes.
25 to 30 minutes you're in the pulpit, and it takes you 8 to 10 hours. I believe that's what you said.
Yes, sir.
Okay, to prepare to preach a 25 to 30 minute message.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what about you, Josh? How long?
That's a fair assumption with prayer and study and reading and meditation. I'm sure it's from 6 to 10 hours usually.
Okay, so it's from 6 to 10 hours in one message, and you generally, on average, preach about how long?
35, 40 minutes.
35 or 40 minutes. Okay, so you've got a lot of time wrapped up in a short time of presentation. Okay, for some men, we would have to say performance.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but we're talking about presentation of the text, presentation of the Scripture. So, you do this twice on Sunday, and you're commuting to your church. How long is your commute?
Hour and 15 minutes.
So he's got an hour and 15 minutes from his home to his church, and you spend a lot of just complete weekends there, and then you're up there a lot through the week. I mean, I talked to you on yesterday, and you were up there. All right. So here's a question for you, Brother Matt. So in your Sunday, all right. So you travel up on a Sunday, you spend all day there on a Sunday, and you drive an hour and 15 minutes home. What is the physical taxing that's on your body from doing that? How do you feel at the end of a Sunday?
Well, when I get home Sunday night, it's usually around 10, 11 o'clock. And when I get up in the morning, of course, about 5 or 6, and then the hour and 15-minute drive, preaching. And then in between services, I study until the Sunday night service and then preach and then come home. And usually we're exhausted, but it's that Monday morning, when I feel the real exhaustion of the
Physical exhaustion.
Yes, sir. The physical exhaustion. Yes, sir.
And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. What about you, Josh? I mean, I know that your commute to your church was how far?
Hour and 20 minutes.
It was an hour and 20 minutes from where he was at to where he was pastoring, and you were not in a full-time pastorate. You were having to work, and you worked in construction, and so you're working in construction, and then you're having to visit, you're having to preach, you're having to pastor, you're having to go and do visitation in the hospital, preach funerals, all of that good stuff.
Yes, sir.
On top of preaching wherever someone else asks you to come preach from time to time. How did it? And you're a young man, strong man. How did it affect you physically?
Physically, it was tiring, it was taxing, but mentally was more for me the issue.
Right.
As far as dealing with issues in your own mind and being the personality type that I am, that you carry things. That was the major issue with the physical and the mental combating with each other. You fatigue easy.
Right.
And stress.
Right. And it's the two combined.
Right.
Okay. Would you say that too? There's a mind battle.
They are.
What are the oppressions that you face as a young man in the pastorate?
The oppression I face, you talking about physically or mentally or
whatever. I mean, what affects you? Well, let's talk about mentally. How does Satan oppress your mind mentally to try to defeat you as a pastor?
Well, a lot of times the thing that Satan attacks me on is after you preach and then you've preached a message that will help people, and they're not there, or they're indecisive, or, then you say, well, I know I could have helped them if they'd have been here, and they wasn't here, and Satan says, he tells me, you ain't doing no good. But then there's times that you feel like you ain't doing no good, and then somebody stands up and testifies about a service a month ago that's got them through something. Right. It gives you a little encouragement. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's that 3-week battle of your mind that you feel like, I'm not getting nowhere. We're not gaining any ground. Right. Folks are not coming, and then all of a sudden somebody stand up and testify about a service that I honestly don't even remember preaching the message. Right. And we laugh, we pick. Your preacher asked you, what'd you preach, last week? And you're like, well, man, I don't remember. And, they don't all remember neither. But then they'll stand up and say, I want to thank God for my pastor who preached on this subject last week or week before last and gave me some encouragement. So,
I think the Lord allows people to do that, to help you out.
Yes, sir.
And I think, and I can't say for sure, but I think that with the ministry, a real preacher, a real man of God who really wants to honor the Lord cannot allow him to feel this awesome appreciation 24 hours a day from his people. I'm thanking God for my people that stand and, I appreciate Preacher Andy and all those kind of things. That's wonderful. But if we had that constantly all the time, there would be this element of pride that rises up within us that would adversely affect us and erode the foundation upon which we stand, which is total reliance on the Lord Jesus Christ. Yes, and so I think that's an essential. I'll say this for me, and of course I'm inserting me here as a pastor who's been at this for longer than you've been alive. Okay, so for my life as a preacher. On Saturdays, my wife will say often to me on Saturdays, she'll say, what's wrong with you? Now, the answer is always the same, and I'll say, it's Saturday. Yes, now, you'll say, well, what does that mean? Well, there is an overwhelming sense of oppression. Now, I don't know any other word to describe it. It's almost like a cloud that hangs over you on Saturday with your anticipation of what Sunday is going to be. Mm-hmm. And, things, and I'm not thinking this, but Satan's shooting thoughts through your mind like, well, who's going to be there or who's not going to be there or what's wrong with such and such person from last week? They've not been here in the last 2 weeks. And you begin to have thoughts that you're not entertaining, but they're coming through your mind that you're having to battle, and you're having to do what Peter said, you're having to gird up the loins of your mind. Now, that's physically and emotionally taxing in and of itself, and then you're trying to prepare, and Satan is, trying to keep you from preparing, and he causes things to arise to get your mind diverted one way or the other. And so what we're doing as pastors is an extremely important thing. And we really don't even realize the importance of what we're doing, nor do we realize and we'll call it this, the satanic opposition and oppression and the overwhelming sense of the spirit that goes on in regard to what we do. This is more than performance. It's preparation and presentation of the preeminence of Almighty God. Yes. And Satan opposes it vehemently. And so what we do is very important, and a lot of times we don't even realize it. We were talking earlier, Josh, about young men answering the call of God to preach. And I want us to go again to 2 Timothy chapter number 2, because I think this is very important in regard to the development of men for the ministry. A lot of mainline Christian denominations are seeing the huge influx of women in the ministry, women in the pastorate. One of the major influences behind that is not so much that women feel this, this great call of God, the ministry. A lot of them, it has to do with a career choice. It pays, better than a living wage and good benefits and all of that in those denominations. But a lot of it also is that situation is exacerbated by the fact that there are no men that are surrendering to the call of God. Now, we had said earlier, we were talking about young men surrendering to preach. Are you seeing that happen, Brother Matt?
No, sir.
And when you were called to preach, were there several young men that were surrendering at that time? Now, and I'll ask you the same question, Josh. Are you seeing young men, let's say ages 18 to 30? Are you seeing many called to preach?
No, sir.
And I'm not either. Now, when you first surrendered to preach, that would have been 2010. 2010. Now, were there some then?
There were.
Okay.
Matter of fact, probably about 10 or so.
10 or so. Okay. All right. So here's the question. Why aren't we seeing that? This is 6-8 years later. Why aren't we seeing that now? And I've seen it drop drastically even since the early 1990s. I mean, really seen it drop drastically. Give me an opinion. Why do you think that is, Josh?
But if anybody's got any common sense, they see it's not a lucrative thing at all.
Correct.
And also, I believe the lack of integrity and the place we are with immorality. There's no clean vessels, it seems like, for God really to use.
Well, that is a problem, no doubt. What do you think, Matt?
I think there's a desire. I think what we're seeing now, you call a young man to come preach, fill in, try to be a help to him. He wants a 2 or 3 week notice. And what I'm seeing is the young preachers that are preaching now, they have no desire to preach, no nursing home ministries, no.
Right. They're just looking to fill up somebody's pulpit.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And when God called me to preach, I wanted to preach every service. I look for opportunities.
Me too.
To come to church, I was hoping my pastor would say, "Give me 5 minutes," or "Give me 10 minutes."
Right.
I'd ask him at the door, and you feel bad. You look like you need to take the night off. And there's just no desire in the young men
That's
to preach.
good.
Yes, sir.
You're right. I agree with that. I agree wholeheartedly with that. That is a real issue, and that's the very first qualification in 1 Timothy chapter number 3. If a man desire the office of, I think the first qualification, and really probably one of the most important qualifications, is that desire within him to preach and to do the work that God's called him to do. Alarming statistic for both of you. Statistically, 1 in 20 men, 1 in 20 that actually surrender to the call of God to preach in their life. And I do believe it's a calling, don't you?
Yes.
I mean, I really do. I don't think it's a choosing. It's rather a divine calling of God. I think Paul makes that abundantly clear in his epistles. All right, so that being said, statistically, 1 in 20 men that surrender to the call of God to ministry, 1 in 20 make it, which means it's there's a worse rate of men quitting the ministry than there are of men and women quitting their marriage.
Yeah.
So it's very unusual, and a lot of men, I think, they start off with a desire to want to do something for God, okay? And the only thing that they see that they can do is, I like seeing that guy behind the pulpit telling folks, about God and the things of God. And so it becomes, the desire they have is not a divine desire as much as it is a desire to be in front of people. Yeah. And it doesn't take long for that to wear thin and to go away. And do you have friends in the ministry that you started with who have quit now?
I have some that have had issues that came out, not necessarily just quit.
So there were moral issues that took place and or ethical issues, and they had to resign. Okay, that happens too frequently. What about you, Brother Matt? Men that you've come up with in years gone by. No one specific, but a situation where a man started the ministry, no longer in the ministry. Yes,
sir. There's 3 right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
That I started preaching in 2005, 13 years ago, and 3 of those men that kind of two of them actually kind of around the same time, or maybe just a little before me, not in the ministry anymore, not preaching, not even church, don't even go to church anymore, and then one just recently.
Right. Yes, now, I know both of you attended Bible college and did well in Bible college. That brings me to a verse of Scripture I want to look at. Look at 2 Timothy chapter number 2 And Paul is admonishing Timothy in the first and second epistles to Timothy. These are what are known as pastoral epistles. The only other pastoral epistle would be, of course, Titus. Okay. Now, in First, Second Timothy, Paul is talking Timothy in preparation as he is headed to the church at Ephesus to take that church and pastor it. And these are some of the verses that we have chosen for the Higher Grounds podcast as some of our theme verses. Life verses for the podcast, and particularly verse 3 about enduring hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. And if you're going to press on the upward way and take higher ground as any good soldier, you're going to have to endure, incoming fire, and you're going to have to endure hardness as a good soldier. Now, verse number 2 says this, it says, and the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. On another podcast, we brought these verses out, I believe, didn't we, Brother Matt? I think so.
Yes, sir.
Now, basically what he's talking about here is the importance of what we'll call mentorship. Have you had some spiritual mentors in your life, Brother Matt?
Yes, sir, I have.
And how invaluable was that resource to you?
My pastor was a tremendous mentor.
Right.
My young ministry, give me opportunity to preach, get open doors for me to preach, and it was a real encouragement and blessing to me.
Now, in his mentorship of your life, were there ever times where he had to rebuke you? He had to say, "Now, hey, Matt, let's talk about something."
No, sir.
No, that's great. Now, I have mentored men where I had to sit them down and say, "Listen, let's put you in check on a couple of issues here," and they took it well. It's all in how you do it. How about you, Brother Josh? Did you have any mentors in your life?
Dr. Lockie, yes, he was the mentor in my life.
Dr. James Lockie is 87 years young, 88 years young, still preaching. I'm talking about still thundering the Word of God, and he poured into your life.
He did.
And was there ever time in your life where he had to sit you down and give you a little rebuke?
He did.
That's good.
In Bible college, I wrote a paper and said, this is how it is pretty much, and he told me that's not how it is.
Yeah.
And he said, you can come off that horse.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I think every one of us, have to have some rebuke in our life from time to time. Now, I know this. Of course, I've seen. Did I teach you in Bible college any?
No, sir. Okay.
I know that I had taught in the Bible college where you went in years gone by, and I did not remember if you were in one of my classes or not. But in my mentorship of other men, the whole key is to put yourself into that man. And your pastor put himself into you. Yes. And I see it reflecting in several areas of your life, and that's a good thing. Your pastor put into you. And I was telling you earlier about Brother Matt. There's only a handful of men that I've known that come up under the ministry of another man that really gave himself to his pastor, to his church, to love his pastor, to love his church, to serve his pastor, to serve his church, to help them, to be a benefit and an aid and an assistant to the work of God that was going on in his local church, other than you, like you, Brother Matt.
Yes.
I'm telling you, God used you really. And before you ever took the pastorate, I told your pastor, I said, now, Brother Aldridge, God's going to use Brother Matt somewhere down the line because of how he is wanting to serve his local church. Yeah. And he wasn't the lapdog of his pastor. Now, it wasn't what Brother Matt was. Brother Matt was just an assistant to his pastor. And I mean, I'm not talking about even holding the quote-unquote title of assistant pastor. He just wanted to aid and assist his pastor and help his local church. And when you have a spirit like that, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's on the job, and particularly in the church, you're going to see God bless that. Yes, God's going to bless it in a mighty way. Now, look at this. This is what I want you to see. And every one of us need to be putting into someone, okay?
Yes, sir.
And this is called discipleship in regard to salvation, but it's called mentorship in regard to good men. He says this, the things that thou hast heard of me. That's Paul. And so Timothy is here. That's two levels here. Paul is giving to Timothy the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses. So it wasn't just Paul to Timothy. He heard it in another setting. Of course, I'm sure Paul poured into his life from Acts 16 on. He said the same things. He said the exact same things you got from me. the same, you commit that to faithful men. That's your third level.
Right.
Right? That's your third level.
Right.
Who shall be able to teach others also. That's your fourth level.
Yes, sir.
So if each one reaches one and teaches one to reach one, how much ground can we cover? Let's say that again. If we teach one to reach one and that one reaches another, I mean, we can really accomplish a lot. But so often men are so selfish or they're anxious about pouring themselves into someone else because of a fear of getting hurt. And believe you me, if you put yourself into somebody somewhere down the line, you're going to get hurt. And there has to be the anticipation of, this is important. I know I'm going to get hurt, but somewhere down the line, God's going to bless it. Well, I appreciate you guys being on the podcast today. And I want to say this to you. There's young men that are watching the podcast. And let me encourage you in the Lord and encourage you to come back each and every week to the Higher Grounds podcast. We want to be a resource of help and a resource of direction for you to help you in your pastorate. And for churches and people that are attending churches that are coming on and visiting with us in the podcast, let me say this to you. Thank you for being here. And we want to give you just a little bird's eye view as to some of the things that your pastor, whether he's a young man, as these are, or whether he's an old man like me, some of the things that these men go through so that you can come alongside him and be a help and an encouragement and an assistant to him in the ministry that God's called him to. And until next time, you keep pressing on the upward way, reaching for higher ground. God bless you, my friend.